episode of Lazy Girl News. This week, my co-host is Jacqueline Kelly of Our Brave Hearts, who is a life coach supporting mums who feel lost in the transition from being the woman they used to be through to the mother they are now. There's zero fluff with Jacqueline, and I, for one, have loved devouring her content, not least of which because she has the best voice ever. Welcome, Jacqueline. How are you?
Thank you, Lucy. Lovely to be here with you.
Okay, so should we dive straight in then?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, number one, the strangest thing. Remember back in 2012 when 26-year-old children and 6 adults were shot dead at Sandy Hook? Those kids are at university now, and it's so weird, but they feel some kind of way about the mass murder of 15,000 children. But as we all know, that's really not the vibe, so the colleges are rightly arresting them for peacefully protesting in designated protest areas. Protests are happening across multiple universities in America, UK and Australia too, but what they should be all shitting themselves about is the fact that France are rising up too. Vive la révolution. Okay, so I personally think this is a galvanising tour de force that will end Israeli apartheid, but perhaps I'm a little bit optimistic. What do you think?
When I started seeing footage of the students' peaceful protests across America, I think, was it Columbia that maybe started?
The UK have also had encampments, a couple of UK universities, even last year, but they didn't really galvanise enough media about it.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly, in my ignorance, perhaps, I wasn't aware of that. So my first visceral reaction to these encampments is what I saw online with the students of Columbia University. And Lucy, like what you talked about there about it being like a galvanizing action. I was like in the kitchen and I could feel the tears coming because the more footage that was coming out and the more I watched, there was a part of me that was thinking, could this potentially be the point at which in years to come, we look back and see it as a pivotal moment and see it as that tiny last piece that just tips it over the edge for the tides to turn? I don't know, but it feels a little bit like that.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And I also found it really emotional particularly watching the faculty come out and walk out in support of the Columbia students and form a like protective ring around them. It was magical to see. And I want to say that what I've heard is that some of the faculty members, probably quite a lot of them actually, were vehemently opposed to what the students were protesting about, which is that they want Columbia to divest from any kind of Israeli supported company. So quite a lot of universities are supported by people like Lockheed Martin, who make planes and bombs, and that's the main mission of the university students. And lots of people, the faculty, won't necessarily agree with this and are really opposed to this, but the right of the student to protest is so ingrained in most of us, I would think, and having that freedom taken away is just so unconscionable that it's magical to see people standing up for those rights. Even Jill Stein, who's the Green Party presidential candidate in the US, she was arrested.
Yeah.
That's mad, isn't it?
It is. And I was looking at this morning, one of the assistant deans, I can't remember the woman's name, has come out, stood on campus and said, I'm probably going to lose my job over this, but I can't I'm paraphrasing because these are not her words, but she was essentially saying, I feel such grief, such sorrow, so should we all, at the breakdown of the relationship between the educators and the student. And so she's now out here knowing full well what she's putting herself in the line of fire for. But interestingly enough, in some of the comment sections of posts, it turns out this assistant dean she comes from a humanitarian background. So she has actually written a book all about displacement. And I imagine the roots of her beliefs and what she has stood for, they run so deep that she cannot stay silent on this. And this is the point at which I think I applaud all of those professors and faculty members who come out. Applaud them, not in a sense, aren't they amazing for doing the right thing, but applaud the fact that they know that they risk everything professionally to go out there and stand in solidarity with the young minds that they are tending to, they're attempting to cultivate. And I think that very moving.
Yeah, really moving. Um, Actually, Colombia, I read something about Colombia specifically. In 1968, I think it was, they had protests on the campus, similarly to what's happening now, and they were violently shut down. Lots of police brutality, not surprisingly, against Black people. And Colombia now have like a lesson about this specific stain on their history that they teach. They teach students on this is what we did wrong, this is something we're not proud of. I find it just mind boggling, and the power of Israel, really, that can be just ignored.
I was even thinking about that today or this morning, actually. Oh, for a long time, but I dip in and out of that clarity of thought where in years to come, those students and the movement and the mobilization that's happening across the world, they will be romanticized and they will be rolled out as that, oh my goodness, isn't this incredible? And yet the lack of willingness to see it for what it is right now, due to the power of Israel, due to the power of the money, due to the power of politics and power, etc. And there are times when I just cannot get my head round how in this day and age, we don't have the privilege that people had back. And I say privilege, I use that word deliberately because in many ways, like choosing to bear witness to what we're witnessing right now. No, but I didn't want it. I don't want it. I don't want that front row seat. And yet at the same time, I won't look away. But when we think back to years gone past and all the atrocities and wars and massacres that have taken place and they didn't have the real-time footage, and people would be like, but we didn't know. The mainstream media wasn't reporting it. And to a certain extent, I'm like, okay, so I can see how that possibly affords a bit of room to manoeuvre in regards to how much you were evading responsibility there. But we don't have that privilege. We know what's going on. We can see it as it unfolds. And I think that is going to be a heavy burden to bear for the people who are not choosing to look at what's been put in front of them.
Shall we move on to our number 2 story? So, in their bid to take away every last drop of joy from everyone's lives, TikTok have been given 9 months to divest from Chinese owner ByteDance, or it will be banned in the US because of security, which doesn't apply to Facebook, Twitter /X, or Snapchat. And if you're wondering why TikTok get 9 months notice, it's probably so Geriatric Joe can promote his wares on TikTok before the election in November. So I covered this on Lazy Girl News a few weeks ago. I'll put the episode link in the show notes. And I said then that it would pass soon enough, not because I'm an amazing political forecaster, but because Joe Biden had said if this, so I covered it when it had gone through Congress, and the pipeline is Congress, Senate, and then the president. And he had said, if it comes through to me, I'll sign it. So it's no surprise that it has all gone through. But still, it's insane. The US government aren't even trying to have a legitimate argument for it. It's almost, you just don't care that we have critical thought. It's so transparent. If it's about security, then you would be banning Facebook. But of course, it isn't about security. I don't think. I just can't see how it's about security at all. I mean, it whiffs of racism, but I'm not sure. What do you think about it?
I think the whiffs of racism are rampant through everything at the moment, even just based on what we've talked on a minute ago about the student encampments and how confronting it is for many people to be seeing these white women being dragged across the campus, particularly the professors. It's all of a sudden we're being confronted with the reality of what so many Black people and Indigenous people of colour have lived with on a daily basis. And then moving on to this piece about TikTok. And I was reading about it because I think I was saying to you, Lucy, that to come and chat about this. And what I love about your podcast is the idea that it really shows that anybody can come and chat about these things. You don't need to be an expert. But I was saying, I'll have to read about a little bit about this TikTok stuff. And I had an idea about what I thought was happening. And then the more I was reading about it and what you just touched on there, about this racism piece about it, it's like the American piece about we don't want the Chinese people to steal all our data. And it's almost like it's the big, scary foreign policy piece that comes out that is used to, it's like the boogeyman. In all the movies, the heroes, Bond villains, so it's like Russians and Chinese people that are out to, and people from Arab countries. And it's so, like, when you peek behind the veil and you see how all these dots are connecting and you think, how legitimate is their concern for all this information being sold? And why are they not concerned about other data that's being sold to other people as opposed to the Chinese governments? And I think, again, that freedom of expression, like the civil rights groups that are coming out to say this is an absolute infringement on our right to freedom of speech. Because how else, I think social media, particularly since October, has really shown us and is shining a light on what we would never have perhaps had access to, the real-time footage on TikTok and on other social media platforms. And we wouldn't have that if it weren't for, okay, there is, of course, a bias and there is the algorithm and there is shadow banning, etc., and suggested recommendations where there is a critique that the suggested recommendations are pumping out false information. But then who decides what the false information is? Because a lot of it is being labelled as anti-Semitic, when in actual fact, is that true? Is it anti-Semitic, or is it that people are standing up and finally voicing that there needs to be a free Palestine, there needs to be a liberation for all? And how that is being labelled as anti-Semitic, I can't understand that.
Yeah. Who does it benefit to call all of these things anti-Semitic? It benefits the Zionist project, and the Zionist project is beneficial to, yes, the Israeli state, but also white Christians, evangelical Christians in positions of power, because that's where it really comes from. I think people don't realize that there are more Christian Zionists than there are Jews total, which, should tell you immediately that, okay, so to be anti-Zionist can't be anti-Semitic. It literally cannot be. But they've done a really good job of marketing, and this obviously goes back 100 years. So it's not like this has just been a marketing ploy in the last couple of years. It's like deep rooted to the point that there's dictionary definitions that are sponsored by Zionists. It's not surprising that it's going to take a really long time to unpick all of this, but actually you're right, because social media has unpicked that for Zionists. Even there are people who are Zionists that are now not Zionists because of what they've seen, and that's really absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, like
not
that
to
challenge.
Us, but
to the powers that be, because when you can no longer control the narrative, then the potential for uprisings and revolution is much higher. And I think that's the gathering of the momentum now. It's the horse is bolted. This can't be stopped. Like people cannot unlearn what they've learned in regards to what's actually unfolding and the people's narrative as opposed to the political narrative. And I think being in a time in history that, I mean, we have front row seats to it, and our brains are just trying to absorb all this information, make sense of it. But again, like that clever marketing piece that you speak to be confronted online when you're trying to engage in a conversation with the fact that you hate Jews and you're anti-Semitic, it has frightened so many people, and it has made them reluctant to engage in conversation because of that narrative around what happened, with the Holocaust and how terrible it was and how many people hated Jews. And now to be branded as someone who hates Jews and anti-Semitic, it's shocking for many people to the point where it silences them, which I think is terrible.
Yeah. So on to number 3, and I'm sure we're going to be talking a little bit more about Zionists now. In its bid to take down Hamas, Israel have killed over 40,000 people, and some of them were buried in multiple mass graves, which were discovered last week. Well, some of them were discovered before, but last week the victims included children, people in scrubs, which we're going to presume are medical staff, and the elderly, and many had their hands tied behind their backs, reportedly, which obviously is an absolute known terrorist move, to terrifying when your hands are tied behind your back. And it must have been so scary for the IOF soldiers. I say this with a lot of sarcasm. If you're still thinking there are 2 sides to every story, just shut up. Because Israel are always telling on themselves, and this is no exception. The discovery of these mass graves, which, to put some more detail on it, were found in Nasser Hospital and El Shifa Hospital. After the IOF retreated, that's when they were discovered, basically. And a UN human rights, I think she's the UN human rights spokesperson, Ravina Shamdasani, called for an independent investigation. Of course, that's a completely normal thing to request. But when she said it, I thought it was interesting, the wording that she chose, because she said, given the current climate of impunity, which felt like a very strong wording, and absolutely correct. But what I find so intensely hypocritical is our leaders who think that an independent investigation isn't at all necessary because we should trust Israel. And I don't know if you saw, but Mary Black, who is just a dream, put this to the Deputy PM, Oliver Dowden, who repeated that we, the royal we, because clearly it's not we, me and you, trust Israel to deal with this because they are a democratic state. And the constant repeating of democratic is so racist and so incorrect that I just can't even imagine parroting that. And the US obviously repeated that same kind of party line. And I don't know if you saw the Channel 4 interview with an IOF soldier who's so brave to come forward and talk. And some of the things that he said were so hard to listen to. It really depicted the brutality of the occupation forces and their attitudes towards Palestinians. The soldier alluded to a really widely held attitude that killing Palestinian children was a sort of preventative measure, which I think probably quite a lot of us know this to be true, but to hear, we intellectually know that to be true in a way, or emotionally know that to be true, but to hear it literally spoken by somebody felt painful.
And I suppose just to pick up that last little thread you were touching on there, to hear it named, I remember last year, and I've spoken about this particular quote a lot, and it was this idea that which is not named does not exist. And that's what that speaks to, because if we don't say it out loud, if there's no direct claiming of the atrocity of the killing of these children so that it's preventative, then it's almost, as you say, we can intellectualize it, we can think it, but if it's not actually given to us by the people who are doing it, then, our mind may not necessarily want to linger in such horrific shadow, so it comes out of there. But to hear it said like that, then it's now in existence, it has been spoken. And I think facing the reality of that, the absolute calculated horror of what we know to be true, but perhaps haven't had it said so bluntly, I think that's a massive piece of all of this. And the hospital, many years ago, in a different lifetime, I worked in the humanitarian sector many years ago, and I worked with the Irish Red Cross. I worked in their international department. I had studied to work in the humanitarian field, and I remember I studied international humanitarian law as part of the course that I was doing, and looking at the ICRC policies, the Geneva Conventions. And I remember thinking at that time, that would have been almost 20 years ago, in my romantic naivety, I thought these wonderful laws, isn't it incredible that as a result of what has gone on in the past. We have these benchmarks, we have these customary international laws. So although perhaps some of them are not written down, it is a rule of war, and other countries, all countries know to abide by them. And then obviously time has gone past. I have not worked in the humanitarian sector for many years, and the illusion of those laws, I think we're seeing through it now. Like this idea that somehow it is a crime against humanity, that there are international humanitarian laws that establish hospitals and health units should not be attacked. That's a complete fallacy, because clearly now we're seeing demonstrated in real time that there are no rules. No rules need apply when Israel is involved. And this idea of an internal investigation, it makes me feel sick, because you and I know, everybody who'll listen to this knows, I live here in Ireland. Any big exposure that's been done into the Catholic Church or to this institutional abuses that have taken place, there have been internal investigations. And nothing good ever comes from those. Nothing transformative, nothing that the rest of the world knows to be true comes from those.
And there's also, again, that idea that Israel stand above every other country in their trustworthiness, which, because in Russia, Ukraine, when there were suggestions of mass graves, there was an independent investigation. And there are journalists that are allowed in, and humanitarian agencies that are allowed in. But in Israel, no journalists are allowed into Gaza. There's this real, it's so obvious.
Yes.
that it almost feels maddening to even argue the point with anyone, because how can you think otherwise? But of course people do, and it runs so much deeper, and there's reasons why people do. They're not logical reasons, and a lot boils down to the propaganda war that has been waged and the marketing strategy that has been set up over the past 70 odd years without most of us knowing about it.
Yeah. And that is where that's the perfect entry point for the word complex to come in, for people to shut us down. It's too complex. You don't understand. You don't know what you're talking about, the history, etc. And again, it goes back to that idea of certainly a lot of people who contact me who have possibly on their personal social media pages felt the need to repost or amplify or share something in regards to demanding for a ceasefire and a free Palestine, only to then come under attack by, you don't know what you're talking about. You shouldn't be getting involved in politics. You clearly don't understand. It's so complex. So like this idea is used as a weapon against us, again, to encourage us to stay silent. And I think the geopolitical positioning of Israel and where it's at in the world, the power, like my mind can't even comprehend the magnitude of what must go on behind closed doors with regards to positioning and power and money and all the deals that are done with the aid that's been recently signed off from the US to Israel. And I think how the normal people can see this, and we are being gaslit on such a massive level, as if we have all got this wrong. We are all unable to understand the complexity of it whilst watching these children and babies and men and women being slaughtered. I can't, my head just, it feels like it implodes sometimes trying to make sense of it.
Yeah, it does feel like you're going insane, doesn't it?
It does, particularly when, and I know sometimes I feel like I also am in an echo chamber of people who are like, yeah, absolutely, let's march, let's boycott. And I'm like, again, it's like this, now it's a growing echo chamber, which is wonderful, because more and more people are like, maybe there is something here to question, maybe there is something to confront, maybe there is a narrative to be challenged. And yet at the same time, when you are confronted with people who are consistently asking, but what about Hamas? What about October 7th? And like demanding that somehow you have an opinion on the atrocities that happened that day as if it's a once-off. And then, of course, that leads you into a whole discussion around, which is not the topic for today, but in regards to resistance movements and rebels and, oh my goodness. I digress.
Yeah, I could obviously talk about this for literally hours, but yes, for another day.
Yeah.
For like a 4-hour podcast, maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving me your time. It's been lovely to chat to you. And I realised what we should have probably talked about is Hamza, who I think imminently is resigning, Hamza Yusuf.
Oh, you'd have to lead there. I wouldn't know. Tell me more.
I don't really know all that much, except that there was a no confidence vote. And I think he's 12 o'clock, I think. He's giving a statement, which I think everyone says is going to be a resignation. And it's something to do with splitting with the Scottish Green Party or something. I literally understand nothing about it, but it's to do with independence. So
Yes.
who knows? We'll watch out for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is breaking news.
All these pockets of breaking news, isn't it, around the world? And I think as well that fatigue that comes in, because again, it goes back to, I think the beauty of your podcast is that we don't need to know everything about everything in order to engage in heartfelt conversations where we can discuss things.
That is the perfect way to end it. Thank you so much. That would be a lovely little soundbite.